Well, I think what we'll do is we'll take 2 or 3, can they please be questions rather than statements?
Can I stand in?
If you're happy with yes, please do. Okay, so 1, 2, anyone over here? Right, okay.
Professor Moosa, do you agree that there was ossification of Islamic thinking? And if you do agree with that statement, what do you attribute the cause to?
Carson.
I would like to get back to your statement about Nietzsche. We always have a slide of this lecture. Most of the quotation you mentioned dealt with Nietzsche talking about man, which also announced the death of God. Is it possible to be Muslim and anti-foundationalist at the same time?
Iqbal.
This distinction between the Khawas and Awam clearly comes from the heritage of Greek philosophy. Is this at the center of the problem between these two, or is that not relevant?
I think there's a lot here.
Yeah.
Okay.
You repeat
Yeah, you didn't say that this is going to be this difficult.
The gentleman asking.
I must repeat the question.
Yes.
I'll happily do so. So the first question, let me get a stab at that. The first question was that there was ossification of Islamic thought, whether I agree. And if so, what are the causes? For that we require history. And I want to say that we lack a strong historical tradition. There are a couple of young historians here. We don't have a serious history of Islam, of Muslim thought. Now you might say, what about Tabari? What about many other Muslim historians and so on, Ibn Khaldun and so on? 2 historians don't make a summer. But apparently they're London in this summer, but I was freezing, so I don't know what kind of summer you guys had. But anyway, the thing is that so we really don't have a good account of our past. So what we do, we grope in the dark, right? So we latch on to episodes as the one I this episode of Ghazali or Nerush, or we blame Sufism to reduce scapegoating. So it will be hard for me to point out the cause. But let me speculate, and hopefully historians will prove me wrong. I think that and this is not based on me alone, but many others, that if you look at Ibn Rushd, Ibn Rushd went through so many difficulties in his own day. And it was, I want to say that despotism was rife over the medieval period, not only Muslims. But it seems that Ibn Rushd, for instance, and it seems that Muslims did not get their politics right. I think the political makes certain things possible. So Ibn Rushd and many Muslim thinkers, they would thrive when there's patronage and that same patron can turn on you. Ghazali, for instance. Ghazali, there was a ruler of Muslim Andalus by the name of Ibn Tashfin. Ibn Tashfin wanted to invade Andalus. He was called there once to help out the Muslims of Andalusia. Then they had to bribe him with lots of presents to go back to North Africa because he saw how pretty it was. And then he now strategized how to get back in Andalusia. Then he solicited fatwas, including to Ghazali and Al-Mazari and others, that these rulers of Andalus, they are really not good, they're exposing Muslim sovereignty to Christians and others. Don't you think somebody should go there and to secure the Muslim realm? And apparently, Ghazali was among those people also who penned the fatwa and said, yeah, go ahead. Okay? So this guy goes, and we know the destruction that was wrought on the Muslim of Al-Andalus. And of course, Ibn Tashfin. Irony is, when Ibn Tashfin's son becomes the ruler, he asked for Ghazali's books to be burnt. Because the ulama and the theologians disliked that Ghazali was also critical of Asharism. So, the whims of political rule. Now, I can't expect those societies to have been havens of liberty, because liberty was not a value the way we understand it today. But so I think it's something to do with the political. And I think it's something to do with the ossification that to do with with interests. And I think the interests were those of the fuqaha and the scholars who basically, interpreted the tradition in such a way so that they could have the power. So while Islam doesn't have a church, its inbuilt church are those who are the controllers of religious knowledge and the way they manipulated that. And a contemporary Tunisian philosopher by the name of Abu Yarab al-Marzuqi, for instance, is extremely harsh, but I think he's right. He's critiquing especially the schools of law, that he said basically, whereas in fact in Islam revelation ends with the Prophet, the authority on which the schools of law and the ulama built the authority, it was almost as if revelation continued through their pens, and therefore they boxed us in. So I think it's some way to do with the kind of despotism, and a despotism that also seeps into thought. And I think you only see the difference, ossification only becomes possible once you compare yourself to other cultures and civilizations. So those who were once ossified, when they liberated themselves, now you see ossification as a comparative thing. So the comparison of ossification where other societies have moved on is a comparative thing. It's a rise of liberalism and the rise of the modern nation state and the post-enlightenment heritage. But before that, one could not make the comparison. So it's also one of comparison, and therefore many people in Islamic thought, in the madrasas that I studied in, and the book is available, I'm plugging the book of course, for you to buy, that when I spent some time in the madrasas, and still when I went to go and research the book, the scholars out there are saying, Islamic thought has all the answers, right? And what was political Islam until even to today? Al-Islam wal hal. Islam is the solution. How does Islam become the solution? No one can tell me, there's no thought. So the question of ossification, I would say we need to really show the historical data must point out to ossification. So for instance, when you say philosophy has ended, scholars like Ahmad Dalal, a friend of mine who works on science, for instance, would say that even after political decline, you still had Muslims doing science. So in the Mughal period, people were still writing, during a Safavid period, people were doing scientific work. So but you see, once you compare to Western European science, and obviously Muslim achievements fade because of particular development of this society in Europe that made it possible, and of course the rise of America changed the whole thing even further. Okay, Muslim and Carol's question, and Nietzsche. See, I think Nietzsche. So one of the reasons I like Nietzsche is not because I like Iqbal, but Iqbal also saw some virtue in Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche is a wake-up call, right? Nietzsche makes us think. And I think that, what are foundations? What are epistemological foundations? They are basically things that we build on as constructions that hold things together. And when the world and the cosmos is designed in a particular way, then the foundations are in a particular way. But I think Nietzsche gave us a wake-up call that the world has changed, right? And that some of these foundations may not be worth holding on anymore. And so when he said God is dead, that is that the God of a certain kind of theology, the way he imagined that God, of course he uses excessive language, and he's into excess, so he uses that kind of God is dead. What he means is that construction doesn't really work. And I think when we, in a post-quantum mechanics world, when we, in a world in which we now think about evolution over billions of years, kind of God as a puppeteer really doesn't work. The puppeteer God doesn't work. So you have to now find new ways and new ways of imagining. So I still think it's possible. But then you're going to have a very different Muslim theology, and you're going to have very different foundations. But part of the issue is you have to fix the ship while it's still at sea. So you have to fix and so on, and there's a hole that you plug and you put in a new plank, and so this boat will continue. And I'm glad to announce that will not be my job. I'll be long gone already when that happens. So that is a good news. Okay. So the third thing that Iqbal's question on elite and laity, is that the center of the problem, the awam? It's difficult to say whether that was the problem there, but this is still the problem here today in our world. Our religious elite, whether it's in Iran or Iraq or in India or Pakistan, Indonesia or Africa and elsewhere, they are still very much into this categorization. Okay, they don't get it. They don't get the democratization of knowledge. And of course, we must also understand this awam khawas kind of question, that is the elite and the laity, ordinary people and the elite. It's also a world in which literacy is very different. I mean, their literacy was a luxury, right? Even though Muslims like to believe that Islam was a literate culture, I mean, it will all be decided on how many copies of my books will be sold tonight, whether you are a real literate culture or not. Right? That will be the litmus. That will be the litmus test, right? That will be the litmus test.
We already know what's in the book.
But still, you have to show empirically that you are ummah of reading. Look,
a receipt. A receipt.
A receipt. Yeah, you can't leave without a receipt. Anyway, so the thing is, but here's the thing: as much as this false claim that Muslims make that they're reading ummah, we don't read. Even as where we have good literacy in places, Muslims in the West don't read actually. So I don't know, maybe they listen to podcasts, that is another kind of reading, or maybe they don't think it's worth reading anyway. That's another thing. That was here saying that maybe that's not worth reading, right? So that's another way of also spending your time more productively. But I think that is the problem for today. We are caught up in that, and we are not dealing with communities and their needs and how to serve those needs. So we wrap ourselves. Muslim leadership wrap themselves up in these kinds of classifications and so on. Well, in the world of the past, I'm again a little bit cautious, and I hesitate to say whether that was the problem. The problem, I think, is that I would like a historian of Muslim philosophy to see how much innovation did Muslim philosophers make. See, I think they were often very much kind of beholden to the Greeks. So when I was in Turkey a couple of years ago at Istanbul, a professor whose name now eludes me, not Istanbul, in Ankara, senior man, great scholar, did work on Ilm al-Kalam. He studied in Baghdad many years ago. So he's kind of very anti-Ghazali. So I read this all the time. So I said, okay, Ghazali was so bad. Okay, fine. What did the philosophers do? Okay, show me what was the product of the Muslim philosophers. Okay, what is the innovation they did? The one that we can get is Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra takes a couple of different kinds of threads of Platonism and so on, and Plotinus, and mixes it and creates a kind of new innovative thing. But where is the creativity? But then the answer might be, well, philosophy was only an elite practice anyway. It was not meant for the masses. It's only now that we now begin, even in the West also philosophy was very much an elite practice. But philosophy as an elite practice sometimes sets the stage. So for instance, the revolution in the modern West, I know Zia will disagree, and maybe Merrill also, post-structuralism, deconstruction, questioning old paradigms and so on, and did shake up the intellectual environment now. Whether it's for the good or the bad, history will judge. But that's a way that you question the epistemological frameworks, and that's what philosophers do, whether, the jury is out on who is right or who is wrong. So I think that this might be just one corner of the problem, but maybe not the whole one.
So, Farouk?
So did you get the question that you asked your question? Number 2 in there. Yes.
Farouk is next question, yes.
Thank you very much.
Stand up, Farouk, please.
Thank you very much for a very stimulating lecture. I'd like to ask you about the terms which Ghazali and Ibn Rushd used, saying that certain doctrines contradicted Islamic teachings. I wonder if they recognize that the term or the phrase Islamic teachings is indeed a a constructed phrase. It is something which gradually developed over a period of time and was subject to very much subjective disagreements. Thank you.
Yes.
Would you like to stand up so everybody can...
What confused me was
What's your name?
Raza.
Raza.
What confused me was the Ebrahim's defense that you have to look at it in terms of esoteric and exoteric knowledge. I mean, you said that maybe the book was written at an earlier time when he was a Phoenician scholar. But in later life, he did become a Sufi, and Sufi is heavily rely on esoteric and exoteric knowledge to defend their point of view. So how was Ebrahim himself using the same idea to kind of defeat the ideas of Zalim?
I will explain that.
And the gentleman in the back row, I come to you next then.
My name is Farhan.
Your name is Farhan.
I just want to ask, I'm particularly interested in applying philosophical knowledge into the everyday.
Sorry, just repeat that again.
Applying philosophical knowledge into the everyday,
Uh-huh.
into everyday world.
Mm-hmm.
My particular thought was the fact that if there's such a plurality in the interpretations of the Quran, as suggested, then is there any facts in the Quran, such as, for example, if it's an extremist ideology, is that something that needs to be respected as an alternative ideology, or should that be condemned, such as liberation theology as well? Should that be condemned, or should that be...
Well, what should be condemned?
Liberation
theology.
theology, you say.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. So should that be condemned? Should extremist ideologies perceived as something that's plurality of the interpretation of the Quran, or should that be condemned as something that's not right?
Okay. Yeah, okay, but big question.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let me answer Raza's question maybe. The confusion, sorry, I might have confused you. So the person who became a Sufi late in his life was Ghazali. So Ghazali was first kind of a very kind of pugnacious theologian and fighting with everybody and showing off and all sort of stuff, and then later on he realized that he was subject to, himself got involved in the politics of Baghdad and so on, then became a Sufi. So Ghazali is okay with esoteric and exoteric interpretation, or Zahir and Batin. He's okay. He's made a whole career out of that. Okay? That's it. Ibn Rushd, in defending the philosophers, saying to Ghazali that you know that everything can be subject to a Zahir and a Batin, in an exoteric and an esoteric interpretation. Why don't you cut these philosophers some slack and thinking that they are doing an esoteric interpretation? That's what Ibn Rushd said to Ghazali. In telling Ghazali, you are forgetting something that's already available in our tradition. You have unnecessarily become a hard-nosed literalist. That's what I'm trying to tell them. So, is that okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, confusion. That's easy. Okay, now the difficult ones. Farooq, your question is that, doctrines, Islamic teachings, when they say things like Islamic teachings, don't they realize that these things are aggregated and so on? So, look, these theologians are also into the game of power. Knowledge is power. Okay? Knowledge is power. I mean, not because Foucault told us, but because we know it. I mean, all of us, the way in which we attach ourselves to things, we're exerting power. So power is not a bad thing. Without power, nothing can function. But they also understood their power. They also thought that they are defending a canon, they defending interests. Ghazali defended Seljuki Abbasi interests. We need to know that. I mean, he defends the interests of Nizam al-Mulk, of the Abbasis. He is on payroll. He's on payroll. I mean, he's been made the grand professor of the Nizamiya and so on. So only afterwards, then he's disgusted with his own conduct. I think that when he gets the kind of psychological breakdown, when he feels all the stuff, he feels disgusted with himself. That this knowledge position that I adopted, because he says, طَلَبْنَا الْعِلْمِ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ فَأَبَى أَنْ يَكُونَ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ, that we search for knowledge for other than God, but knowledge refused to be but for God. He has a very kind of sacred understanding of knowledge. That's where he flees, he goes into and tries to purify himself, and that's when he begins to understand that's a different Ghazali and so on. But even that Ghazali, that second Ghazali, he can't get the kind of the political bias out of it. So for instance, the example I give in my book is the Ismailis. He says that when an Ismaili is caught and you interrogate them, and even if they recant their heresy, you should kill them. Even if they recant their heresy, you should kill them. Why? He says, well, their belief and their doctrine is that they should never speak the truth. They are engaging in dissimulation. But then he realizes that people are going to put it on what basis do you say that? He said, well, that's my ijtihad. People might disagree with me. Okay? But that shows the way in which the empire gets into your DNA. It gets into your piety. It gets into your piety. Okay? So we must be alert to the machinations of power and empire and into even our theological thought, into our piety too. So we need to look at these things and interrogate and make these things very transparent. And today we hopefully can do that in more ways than they could do that. So I hope I've answered the question that for them they would box it together. I mean, I used to say Islam says. I stopped doing that. I used to do that when I was in grade 1, right? Okay. So now no more. Muslim discourse says so and so, give a name and address and talk about it. Sometimes when I have to talk to my daughter and son, I say Islam says, don't do it. But then can become Professor Danda, you know. but otherwise I try to know. And the thing is that my daughter does not attack me in Islam. She really interrogates me, so I can't even do that with my family anymore. Okay, Farhan. Apply philosophical knowledge in plurality, interpretation of Quran, facts in the Quran, and liberation theology, should that be done. You know, so I got into a lot of trouble many years ago. What was it again? I said that the Quran has stories. I said the stories of the Quran. It was a Friday sermon I gave. And kind of some of your half intelligent followers know. I shouldn't say I can't say that. Can you take it easy? I'm your guest today. Okay? So one of the Musallis, one of the people who came in and asked, Sheikh, you can't say that the Quran has stories. The Quran has truth. It has facts. So I said, but the Quran says, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ. We have given you the best of stories. Okay? But this is when I realized the modernization of Islam, the kind of technicization of Islam. So people are looking for technology, they're looking for nuclear atoms in the Quran, they're looking for how can we turn jinns into electricity, all this kind of stuff. They look for all this kind of stuff. Imamometers and so on, and Sheikh Google nowadays, and all this kind of stuff that goes on. So people try to find that. So it's a whole new literacy that has developed. And I hold those of us who are responsible for the dissemination of Islamic learning of not doing a good job. I mean, because there's no thick learning, there's no thick discourse, there's no thick literacy in Muslim societies. It's all such simplistic stuff that everything must be read off the pages of the Quran, from science to atomic physics and everything that we have now there. So the Quran is, as it says in its own language, it is ibarah. It's about ibarah. Ibarah means that you need to make the word ibarah is from the word ma'bar. Abara means to cross over. So the Quran says, make the crossover. You read these pages, you take these stories and make the crossover. It is your story. It is your story. The problem is we've been intimidated into thinking, so we don't want to make it our own stories. And we're also lazy. So this laziness and a combination of intimidation just makes for a fatal thing. So the Quran has, I'm not entirely sure whether the facts of the Quran, for instance, the story in the Quran is that Muslim doesn't say, but we assume that Ismail is the one who's been sacrificed. Right? That's the assumption. In the biblical tradition, it is Isaac. A lot of the stories, the Quran doesn't give you a full story, it gives you snippets. And the idea of the snippet is to launch you into a reflection, okay? But it's the duty of Muslims. So what I think the error is to try and find historical facts in the Quran. But there's a certain kind of classical, interpretive, Quranic, exegetical tradition that wants to make it facts. Okay? So it's not something that we've invented. So it is part of that. But I think it requires a revision that these are snapshots of larger stories. That are sometimes these snapshots are also put in such a way to make that point and doesn't give you the full story itself. And you don't have to fight over, whether it's Ishmael or Isaac or whether it's, where did Noah's Ark, where did it dock, and what's the exact places and that kind of thing. Now, we are in a world of empirical science where we want kind of exactitude and exactness and so on, but I don't think it is necessary to do that because there are people who are fundamentalists who have figured it out, Christian fundamentalists who figured out what the temperature of hell is. They figured it out. They worked it out at how many thousand degrees it is. So I don't want us to go there. So to answer your question, I think you need to find in the Quran hikmah, wisdom, okay? And that's in the Quran itself. It says that that it is sent you with the book and with hikmah, kitab wal hikmah. And so the book is connected. Some people say that wal hikmah, that the book is the explanation of it. You have to find the wisdom in that. So it's a wisdom tradition, largely, not so much a factual tradition. So what you do with liberation theology and so on is that you're taking the messages of great, emancipation in the Quran. And I talked about virtues, and I talked about the importance of virtues. I just want to share with you, and I didn't get it to say there, but this is how virtue is made in the experience of the Prophet himself. Okay? And I think this would be instructive. When he goes to Taif to give the message, okay? Why does he go to Taif? He goes to Taif because he believes that the people of Taif are sympathetic to him. He had spent some time in his childhood there, right? Halima, right? And he was suckled there and so on. And he goes there and the treatment he gets expelled. Not only does he get expelled, he gets pelted by some of the ruffians in the town, right? And then when he comes outside the town, he meets a slave called Adas. And Adas gives him some grapes and gives him some water. And at that time, and this is a story that I think of virtue and how virtue is cultivated and how courage is established. And the Prophet raises his hands and he says, Allahumma ilayka ashku dha'fa quwwati wa qillata hilati hawani ala nas. Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Anta Rabbul Mustad'afin. Liberation theology. Anta Rabbul Mustad'afin wa Anta Rabbi. Ila man takiluni. Ila ba'idin yatajahhamuni amila adubbin man tahtahu amri. إن لم يكن بك علي غضب فلا أبالي ولكن عافيتك أوسع لي أعوذ بنور وجهك الذي أشرقت له الظلمات وصلح عليه أمر الدنيا والآخرة من أن ينزل بي غضبك أو يحل علي سخطك ولك العتبى حتى ترضى ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بك. Oh Allah, I complain to you of the weakness in my strength, the lack in my strategies, and the humiliation I face in the eyes of people. Oh, the most merciful of those who are merciful. You are the Lord of the oppressed, and you are my Lord. To whom have you entrusted me? To a stranger who scowls at me with hostility? Or to an adversary who has power over me? As long as you do not resent me, I do not care. Your vitality is all that matters. I seek refuge in the light of your face, the radiance that dispels all darkness, and whose glow sets right every matter in this world and the next. That neither your anger nor your displeasure ever descend upon me. I seek your satisfaction until you are pleased, There is no power and no might except by you. When the angel comes, Jibreel comes to him and says that God has put the angel of the mountains at your dispensation. If you want, we can collapse this valley and kill the people of Taif. And what does he say? He says that I pray that someday some people of the loins of those people will be followers of my faith. In other words, this is when you're in the weakest, you show the greatest courage and faith in the future. This is what courage means. Courage means not to be only counting the sense that how many people you can kill in a day. Right? How many people you can kill and put on television and then show to the world that how powerful you are. But courage is to hold back your revenge and anger for a moment that you can respond without even your own control, that life and the power of nurturing in the universe will bring about a better day. That is what you call courage. That is the kind of thing that Ibn Rushd and Ghazali teaches us.
Osama.
I need some water.
So thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. And to follow that lovely prophetic story, I feel a bit ashamed actually to ask her to start talking about philosophy again. But I just want to respond to your challenge about how creative were the Muslim philosophers. Because of course Bertrand Russell famously wrote in the History of Western Philosophy that in his chapter on Islamic philosophy, that the Muslim philosophers only translated and commentated and did not add anything new. And I think a lot of the research since then has shown that completely untrue. So for example, the Ghazali's method of doubt that you so eloquently mentioned, I mean that's centuries before Descartes' method of doubt. While Halak in his translation of Ibn Taymiyyah's critique of Greek logic, I mean he shows Ibn Taymiyyah presenting ideas which predate Locke again by centuries. But when my philosopher friends quote Derrida and Deleuze, etc., I always find that those ideas are all there in Arabic, drawn from the Revelation, etc. And I get the sense that some of these philosophers take one strand out of the millions that you find in the spirituality of the Quranic tradition. I would like to argue that actually the Muslim philosophers and theologians, the ulama, the good ones, were incredibly creative, and we're still trying to catch up with them centuries on.
We can have a conversation over dinner, but let me, can you answer?
Yes.
No,
answer this now.
I'm not going to skirt the question. I'm not going to do Ghazali. Well, we can't really decide on that right now. No. I think so. One of the things I wanted to say, Ibn Rushd, for instance, Averroes, was not as obedient a follower of Aristotle, so there are innovations that he makes too, and therefore some people might be unhappy with him and so on. What I'm thinking of in terms of, but I think you see now, you quoted Ibn Arabi and you say you quote Deleuze and Derrida and so on, that is all about language and language philosophy. So, Derrida is all about the return of language, the rereading of the Saussure, and ways of understanding, how do we act, because, what we have in terms of analytical philosophy also reaches its dead end, right? So the end. So who hates French philosophy? Analytical philosophers, right? So the thing is that Ibn Arabi, that's kind of philosophy, theology, a mix, and the reception Ibn Arabi gets in Muslim society. I mean, there's some places you cannot mention Ibn Arabi's name. So I think the jury, I would say that the jury is still out for us to have an accurate record of what it is. So Ghazali's understanding of doubt, there's many people who have written books and saying Ghazali precedes Descartes and so on. But I still feel that this is just Muslim feel-good things, okay? Descartes is his job, Ghazali is his job. I'm not entirely sure what we get by showing. Now I think what I find problematic is that I think we cater to a particular kind of Muslim psyche, and that is, if we didn't have it, then they can't have it. Or if we didn't have it in the past, we can't have it in the future. So that's the virus I'm fighting. So if we never thought of it, if the Prophet never thought of it, I don't want to say God never thought of it, but if the Prophet never thought of it, then we can still think about it, and we can innovate. Okay. So that is my political problem with that mode of thinking. But I have no doubt that on the facts, you won't be able to show a whole lot of stuff, that Muslim philosophers might have contributed. But I'm not entirely sure whether it was really productive to Islamic thought per se. The best people that did use Muslim philosophy well and used pieces of it are the Muslim theologians, right? The Ash'aris, the Mu'tazilis and others, they use philosophy and Greek philosophy and others, and they both systems. They use other modalities of thinking. The Muslim theologians were better utilizers of philosophical thought than the Muslim philosophers themselves, but that is a speculative answer I'm giving you. Those are not the facts. You have quoted some facts, and I'm hoping for a dissertation that will lay it out on modes of creativity. Fakhruddin al-Razi, for instance, is a great theologian. I mean, this guy uses all kinds of stuff and make fireworks, man. I mean, he's amazing. I mean, the kind of work he does. So, but he's a theologian. Okay, so that's what I'm. Yes.
Okay, I've got so many questions now. I've said yes to one here, and then I'll come to you there.
My question is, with all the philosophizing that Ghazali himself did, didn't the irony escape him that, he's himself a philosopher?
So what's your name?
It's me.
Yes, me.
And the gentleman. Yeah.
My name is Shafiq Siddiqui. Ramadan is going to be coming soon, and we are going to be dependent on, of course, the sunrise, sunset, the calendar.
I know where this is going.
Confusion that causes as well, and of course about the Eids as well. Do the philosophers have any sort of guidance on that?
Just announced a 10-hour rota for UK, and we will all be very happy.
So yes.
My name is Mikdad.
Mikdad.
What really was the scope of all the intention when Ghazali used the word reason in that sort of triangle of interpretation? In Imami legal thought, you talk about rationality being a core source of understanding, but in reality, that rationality is really a dependent source, not really an independent way of thinking. Similarly, in philosophy, we've got a different way of understanding what rationality or reason is in that triangle. How does he distinguish between imposing a pre-existing, independent, rational, ethical view on revelation or on text, compared to using reason as a means of understanding the text?
Okay. Yeah, I think human beings are complex, and I think Ghazali is a very complex man, a very complicated man. I mean, I think so. So as they say, وَلِكُلِّ خَيْرٍ كَبْوَةٍ عَفْوَةٍ وَلِكُلِّ سَيْفٍ عَفْوَةٍ وَلِكُلِّ خَيْرٍ كَبْوَةٍ, right? Kabwa. So every horse can stumble, and every sword has a blind spot. That is a proverb and so on. So yeah, you ask and answer that basically your question. Shafiq's question about Ramadan and the endless calculation and the craziness of Muslims not knowing when the month begins and when it ends and so on. Yeah, I shrug my shoulders, and I follow a scientific calculation for decades now. I don't follow the kind of craziness of where, waiting for some authority to cite the moon and whether it's in Saudi Arabia or where. I think science is a good indicator and giving us in advance, where when Ramadan begins and when the holy months and going to be. And I think we do this to our deprivation. But there's extremely, antagonistic positions on this within varieties of Muslim sects and so on. So I think I'm going to go for the easiest things first. First, adopt reason, okay? Then maybe we'll come to empirical reason, because that's kind of certain kind of empirical. People give you all kinds of I get kind of tired of the kind of apologetics that people say in some very, influential and charismatic Muslim authorities. I'm not going to mention names, and they say, how beautiful it is to look at the moon, and you become more romantic, and we can't become denatured and follow science and so on. I said, you only want to become romantic and look at the moon in terms of Ramadan, and other days when you think you don't look at it, it doesn't sell it. So you know my answer. A 10-hour rosa, a 10-hour fasting. I can't figure that one out for you. You must follow your local authorities. You need to work it out.
21 hours in Scotland, in Glasgow.
I'm going to 21 hours. That's a bit extreme. But I think Osama Hassan last year wrote on a blog. He wrote a blog last year. Man, that gentleman sitting behind you.
Yeah.
That gentleman sitting behind you. He wrote something last year on the blog about why you might be able to do something else, and you can have a different way of evaluating. But this is something. Let me not start a fitna here, okay? So I don't want to start fitna. Let me just say this: you need to decide this collectively, okay? Especially about the length of the day. When I start is on me. Imam Shafi said, and I follow Imam Shafi. Shafi said, for people who have faith in astronomers, you are obliged to follow astronomy. So I'm following astronomical calculations and so on. But as to this whole question of length of the day, you don't want to have a situation where you're beginning in the morning and ending your fast at 4 o'clock, and other people say you're starting at the end and so on. You need to work out that, and there should be a general consensus. So if there's a fitna here, it doesn't come from me.
So what do you follow? What was Imam Shafi's
No, on the length of day, he didn't have anything to say on that. The normal thing is that when you are in an abnormal zone, if in an abnormal zone, then you must follow the nearest normal zone. And I think 21 hours would be an abnormal zone. But there are people in Canada, for instance, where they have the fatwa. Big place in Canada, not Calgary, the other big city in Alberta, Edmonton, and they have, a ruling of how many hours they should fast. And there are some people who are still fasting 21 and 22 hours. I mean,
let them do that.
That's their problem. That's their problem. If I were there, I would not be doing that. Anyway, Mikdad, the other question that Mikdad had.
But can we hold Ishtihad on it?
Yes, Muslim Institute should organize a meeting on that.
She shouldn't stop and she have a referendum on everything.
We should have a referendum on that. Okay, so can we get off the Ramadan enthusiasm for a minute? Thank you. So let's get onto the enthusiasm for reason. Okay, so Mikdad's question on reason. So reason is both seen in multiple ways by someone like Ghazali. There's formal reason, and Ghazali was a big champion of logic. So he actually boasts and says, I love logic and I find the logic in the Greeks, but I also translate it into Quranic idiom. He says, I was the first. He boasts that. He does. So he likes the formal logic, loves particularly syllogisms and so on. But he also thinks of reason as something intuitive. That is intuitive. So. And that is what impulse is. Now the way in which formal logic has its limitation, but intuitive reasoning can be informed by a variety of imaginaries, right? So the spiritual imaginary, and that depends how well you can imagine, that it opens up entire horizons for you. And so you can then see, for instance, in Ghazali's book, Mishkat al-Anwar, for instance, the way he projects reason there with all kinds of suprasensible imaginaries related to that. And that's where Muslim theologians and metaphysicians are really good at. Mullah Sadra is one example, Ibn Arabi is perfect. But the question of rational intellect and, so one is what we call discursive reason, right? So someone like Ibn Taymiyyah calls out Ghazali. In the beginning of his book, Ibn Taymiyyah has a book called Dar'u al-Ta'arud bayn al-aqli wal-naql, ending the contradiction between reason and tradition. Okay? He opens up with a huge attack and he says, these guys, Baqillani and Ghazali and some of these theologians, they come to the text with a paradigm in their heads. And they interpret the text of the Quran and the Hadith through that paradigm that they have. And he says, that's not right, you need to let the text speak to you. But that's also another falsity, because it's not that we have a tabula rasa up here. We already have these grids. These grids are already there. They are by nature, they are by nurture, and we have these grids. And so Ibn Taymiyyah is just trying to score points. He doesn't agree with their paradigms, so he's trying to accuse them of having false paradigms and only trying to be his own paradigm. But he does say that they come, so everybody goes to any interpretation. Therefore, Gadamer put it to us very nicely, that when we read a text and so on, it's your horizon that you have and the horizon of the text, and these two horizons meet, and that's how we find interpretation, right? Because the author of a text also has a horizon that we try to divine that horizon, we try to fathom that and so on. So the pre-dependent rational ethical is taken as a given, but they also understand that there are multiplicities of it, and people like Ibn Rushd and Ghazali in better moments try to put a formal grid to that, a formal filter to it, so they can have certain kind of unanimity. So for instance, what Muslim jurist boasts in, say, Islamic law is that they have a certain kind of formal reasoning through syllogism, that they have controls. Or in philosophy, Ibn Rushd says, I would like to have Burhani reason, demonstrative reasoning, and not Jadali, that is the dialectical reasoning, or Sha'ari, the poetic reasoning that Ghazali likes to follow. So there are varieties of reasoning, each one have their preferences, they've also named it, and they've also used it, and they've also abused it. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but there are these kinds of varieties of reason that are prevalent. I think one just can't say reason and think it's going to work like magic. Reason has its own history and applications, and it you know, today, I mean, I'm writing a book called Between Right and Wrong, Debating Muslim Ethics, and one of the issues I'm stuck on is that understanding of reason that Plato and Aristotle and Nietzsche gave us, that reason is out there, and through certain kind of mental process we will reach that. That doesn't really work today. I mean, today we understand that reason is the way we are wired. It's our wiring, right? It's a certain kind of wiring, it's about nurture, it's about the stuff here. So it's a real challenge that our tradition talks about reason in one way, but modern empirical reasoning talks about that it's embodied. And now, of course, there's a big debate. I've just come from Rome, where we had a philosopher by the name of Bernard Stiegler, and you know, kind of the disenchantment that is going on, you know, amongst philosophers and so on. You know, people like McIntyre and people like Stiegler and others, they're trying to re-enchant the world, and they're trying to look and retrieve Aristotelian reason. Okay? And McIntyre is big about retrieval of Aristotelian reasoning, and because Aristotelian reasoning is a counterbalance to Enlightenment reasoning, and one of McIntyre's kind of disagreements with Enlightenment reasoning is that it is completely thrown out physics, right? It is abandoned physics in terms of metaphysics. So McIntyre wants to bring back Aristotelian. I don't know what kind of work he's going to do for him, but what McIntyre's real project is to have, through Aristotelian reasoning, is to have a stable and a fixed human nature. That is the project. How to have a fixed human nature. And I'm not entirely sure. Your question, you know, can we have foundationalism and anti-foundationalism? I'm not entirely sure that the human nature that we have, or the way we conceive human nature 500 years ago, is the same way we conceive human nature now. I had some conversations with some philosophers at the conference we were in Rome, and saying, you know, the way we structured human nature at one time was to say, you know, males first, women second, then slaves and children and so on. It's kind of hierarchical. Okay, we can rearrange that and say, you know, maybe we can think about it in different ways. How does flourishing take place? If you make flourishing the key concept of what human nature is, then maybe we can arrange it and men and women, and there's no more slaves, or at least we think there are no more slaves, but people might say there might be slaves for capitalism, other kinds of things and so on, other kinds of forms of enslavement, but at least that kind of old slavery that we used to have is no longer legal. It might still be prevalent in some places. Given that, we need to think about how do we think about human nature, and is human nature as fixed as we once thought it was, or does it have a fixed core and a very changeable penumbra? Okay, and maybe we think about it that way. So those are the places where questions of reason take us to, and these are very agonistic struggles that we have. So people like Ibn Arabi and others, they could kind of make this reason thing work with a kind of a very, very capacious metaphysics and lots of kind of things that they build up and kind of mesmerize you with their language and so on. But at the end of the day, we have to answer very basic questions about, you know, what is a human being? what is a human person, what is sexuality, what is sex, what is gender, especially after Bruce Jenner.
Okay, quick.
As you can see, I come from America.
Well, we all read Vogue, surely. Gentleman there.
Sorry, Caitlyn Jenner, not one of Bruce.
Yes.
How do the philosophers explain this hadith that God made Adam on his own image? Then we know that God has got no image, and we are talking about the image of Adam.
Thank you. It's a good thing I just researched this recently. So I just researched it for a paper recently, so at least you didn't catch me flat-footed. So, Meryl, are we taking
yes,
questions?
This is now, I think, going to be our last round of questions.
So I'm taking one question there.
That one there. Then there is gentleman here.
Yes, hi, thanks. I never learned so much in 1 hour than I've learned so much. Thank you very much.
Is that a good thing or bad thing?
You said you used a very good phrase, very complicated man, and I think to me it appears that there was a combination of some inferiority complex and narcissism on Ghazali's part, that he was so impressed in one way that he projected everything, and I think then a whole discourse about his, I think he was fighting in his own way, the logic which he found, and he was stuck in the Islamic theology in many ways. So I think that created his brilliance, or whatever you want to call it, and I think which did so much damage in many ways. And I think that, and what Osama said, that it's you and me, we did something as well. This is Muslim creativity as well. This is Islamic science as well. So I think instead of looking at a humanistic way and a more global thing, he failed to look at that kind of, it was a global achievement rather than this one.
The lady here.
Assalamu alaikum everybody. I'm Khadija Bade, the founder of an organization that empowers Muslim women, Iman. Shukran for your stimulating as usual, but inspirational. And I'm glad to see that you have connotated or alluded to women and gender equality. And my question is around liberation. In the first set of questions you mentioned about the historical, there is no true history of Islam, we are so confused about it, and you mentioned very little. You mentioned once about liberation. Now, what I want to know is, regarding Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, and also some of the other theological perspective and philosophical perspective, is about how do you deal, because I'm grappling with this from the grassroots, how do you deal with the rights of women in Islam? And because you get such confusing and conflicting, I'm a person of my own, it doesn't bother me, but the people that I support, it bothers them. So can you help, please?
So many hands are going up. I have to take one last question, so I'm going to ask the gentleman. Yeah, you get the last question.
Thank you. I'm a novice, first time I've been to this meeting. But you touched on various qualities of the philosophers of the past and human nature. But it came short of mentioning the word fear. Fear. What role fear played at the time of Ghazali and later? And were there fearless thinkers at that time? And what happened to them?
Okay. Thank you. First of all, if I meant to say that you've been a fantastic audience, and I know there's a lot of questions, and I really appreciate this. This is a hopeful scenario for me. It's very hopeful that they are thinking people. So, and this comes as no kind of, in no patronizing thing. It just makes me feel good. So, and thank you for your patience that you all stick around. I know you're sticking around for the meal, but nevertheless, I stand between you and your Turkish dinner. So I have power. The Adam story. The hadith is very interesting. Inna Allah khalaqa Adam ala surati. The hadith of Bukhari. God created Adam in his image. The big debate amongst theologians where the his refers to Adam. That God created Adam in Adam's image. Okay? But others say that this might be similar to the biblical tradition, that God created Adam in God's image. The interpretation there is that the most viable interpretation, that you are right, that no one knows God's image, and it will be, at least in Islam, the sacrilege to make the implication that God has a form. So the word surah, the surah here is metonymy, it is kinaya, it is metonymical use in language. In other words, it indicates something else, and that is that God created Adam in terms of his attribute of knowledge. So that this form that Adam imbibed from God is knowledge. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. That God taught Adam the names of all things. That is that the transference of knowledge, divine knowledge. God taught Adam how to think, how to reason, and that's what it means. So it doesn't mean that Adam is in the form of the divine, but has internalized attributes of the divine. Does that make clear, sir? Does that make it clear? The attributes of the divine, not the form of the divine. But we can talk more about that. As to the question of I appreciate your view on what was going on with Ghazali and so on, and maybe he was fighting a whole range of demons and so on. But hey, anybody, I wish I had so many demons that I could.
Saw asylum in Britain, I think.
No, I don't think so. Hawaii would be a better place. I would want to have so many demons that I can produce such a legacy. That's extraordinary. So such a crazy guy leaves such an amazing legacy that till today we are working on the nibbles. That's quite true. And Ghazali travels in all Muslim sects and so on, right? I mean, there's the Ibn Ashari version of Ghazali, and they've been living off that, and philosophers and others have taken Ghazali in a variety of ways. So, and people like Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, and in Europe, they read Ghazali too. So, but we have to. We can't tailor-make these people. They come as the cosmos gives them to us. Human nature, fear, and fearlessness. Ghazali, Ghazali was in some ways fearless too. On many positions, for instance, that he breaks with the tradition. He breaks with the tradition on the question of duration, dahr, in the Kalam, in Muslim theology. He breaks with the Asharis on the interpretation of that. And some people are trying to tell him, but you're stepping out of line, and he said, so what? Okay? And so therefore that quote that I gave you where he says, don't follow lead, but do be an independent thinker, do ijtihad, and don't do taqleed. Even in Mustasfa, and you can find in academia.edu, I have a chapter on Ghazali as a jurist, and I have a whole translation of a section of his on the question of opposition to following authority. And it seems that this man was obsessed of how to unshackle himself from authority. But it seems that was kind of one obsession. He's always thinking about ijtihad and anti-taqleed. And so it seemed, so he takes a minority position. The majority says that people must do taqleed. He says, not necessarily. Even lay people like Zia, that who lays down all the time, that's what I mean. No. Lay people, I can joke with Zia, we go back a long time, but you can't.
Zia won't let them.
Yeah, you do. Lay people have to, even they must make some form of elementary ijtihad. So if you come to a place, and in the same way that you have to make ijtihad, people give you 3 positions and you have to figure out which one is the best position. That inquiry that you make, who is the better position and what's the qualification, that itself is a certain kind of ijtihad, kind of independent solicitation of opinion. So he's really hard on this question. For him, that is the obsession. And I think he understood that salvation comes through your own commitments. And he was not too trustworthy of that you have to go with the flow and follow what the flow says. So I mean, in that way, he was idiosyncratic according to others. So that requires a certain kind of fearlessness and so on, and confidence. He also stands up to political authority. So he had said some things in his youth, for instance, in which he was brutally critical of Abu Hanifa, for instance. And he said, you know, Abu Hanifa is not a smart guy, he wasn't a good jurist, and so on and so forth. Later in his life, some of the Hanafis reported him to the political authorities. He was hauled up to come, and he had made a vow he's not going to meet with political authorities. And so instead of going to political authority, he says, oh, but I will meet you at such and such a place, some halfway place. That takes a lot of courage, not to go. But saying, I'll meet you at a halfway place that I really don't have to go to your court, but I will come back. So he's still a kind of a hero for me in many ways. I like, maybe I've lived with him for too long. It's like, you know, living with a what's the name, an abusive spouse. You know, you just stick it out. So maybe that's my problem.
It seems to me they were also afraid of masses, that they were not allowed free thinking.
Yeah, but free thinking was not a virtue, even by the philosophers of those days. So we're imposing a standard that was not really a standard even at that time. Someone like Abu Bakr al-Razi was the greatest free thinker at that time. But, I mean, we see him now as a free thinker, but he possibly had views that, see, okay, free thinking and these kind of things emerge. So this is what I see. From the 10th century, 11th century onwards, Ibn Sina had his views of emanation, Al-Farabi had his views of emanation, and no one said they were bad Muslims. Or no one called them out. It comes with Ghazali. Ghazali called one of the first people that at least publicly called them out. Al-Karabisi and Bukhari, the collector of Sunni Hadith. Bukhari did not believe that the Quran is uncreated. He says, Lafzi bil Quran makhluk. My utterance of the Quran is created. But later on, and if you believe that the Quran is created, it was a corporal offense. It was a death penalty for it. I wrote about that in one of the issues of Critical Muslim, which is also a publication you should be supporting, inshallah. So that's another important area. So it's when you have a canon and canonization of authority that things that were not deserving of a red card becomes a red card afterwards. Okay? And so this is just how over time certain things, because of accumulation, kinds of authority that develop, that make things that were not verboten. You know, that's how it works. So Abu Bakr al-Razi, no one said that he was a zindiq, that he had mass infidelity. It comes much later that people now say, oh, this guy was saying these things. But they say that in the light of, now that you have a canonical authority developed, that these things, you get called out to that. And so talking about the questions of how we understand, you know, history and the place and the place of the ethical. I think that so the question of women is a huge issue and not a resolved issue. But I think slowly, large sections of Muslims are coming to that page of understanding Muslim women to be fully human, to be fully equal, and
in charge.
Pardon me?
And in charge.
And in charge, and doing just as a bigger mess as men do. But anyway, the thing is this, that, you know, I think we're coming to that, but there's a lot of work on it. Much of the discrimination is also cultural, as you know, but I think we need to give people the tools. And I think that the fiqh things are one thing, but I think once we begin to have a much more thicker doctrine of cultivating virtues, the virtues of courage, of justice, of fairness, of beauty, ihsan, okay? One of the things that I think that we really need to cultivate in Islamic thought, in our ethics, is ihsan. Ihsan, which means perfection, but actually means beautification. How husn. I mean, the uglification of Islam is possibly the biggest crisis we should be thinking. The uglification. I mean, this huge uglification. Uglification in thought, in bodily aesthetics. I mean, where's aesthetics gone? So, a return to aesthetics, the return to beauty, and that beauty comes from the interior that then also manifests itself on the outside. And that's where, you know, people today talk a lot about maqasid al-Sharia, maqasid, the big picture of Sharia, the 5 big objectives of Sharia. That's all good and well. But one of the major authors of that doctrine was a man in the 14th century called Izzuddin ibn Abd Salam al-Sulami. Izzuddin ibn Abd Salam al-Sulami, when he writes about that, he starts off with this doctrine of ihsan. It is about this developing excellences, it's about developing perfection, developing beauty that moves you to understand what is the big picture of Islam. So I think one of the things that we need to think about, think big picture, and because I think that we have reached a time now, especially in the women's union, this is my closing comment, that I think about Sharia as 2 ways. People think about, I call one the telephone book version of the Sharia, that the big pages, all these addresses and details and so on. And I think about the other version of Sharia, which is the kind of the Mona Lisa version of the Sharia. What is a beautiful, Now, a lot of people, when you give them the Mona Lisa, they worry about, so what's the color of the Mona Lisa's fingernails? I said, there are no fingernails. Think about the beauty. See, Muslims get distracted by these things. So think about big picture. Because the phone book is now getting all dated. People move so quickly, these telephone addresses and telephone numbers are now. But I think there's also a danger in this maqasidi approach being reductive.